The heavy oak door vibrating with the splash of bathwater should have broken my heart. Instead, the giggling of a woman who was certainly not my daughter only confirmed what I had suspected for 6 months. I did not scream or pound on the wood. My hand moved with the silence of a ghost as I turned the lock from the outside. My son-in-law thought he was safe in there, but he was actually trapped. My name is Marjorie Callahan, and at 58 years old, I have learned that silence is often the loudest weapon in a woman's arsenal. I stood motionless in the upstairs hallway of my daughter's pristine colonial-style home in Ravenbrook, Colorado, staring at the brushed brass knob of the master bathroom. The house was quiet, save for the rhythmic sloshing of water against porcelain and the muffled, playful giggles drifting through the solid oak wood. "Oh, stop it. You're terrible," a female voice cooed from inside. It was not my daughter. Louise had a throaty, rich laugh, inherited from her father, full of warmth and genuine joy. This woman sounded like a wind chime in a gale, thin, tinny, and cheap. Then came the unmistakable baritone rumble of my son-in-law. "Damon? Relax, babe. She's at that teachers' conference until Sunday," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Nobody is coming home." The betrayal should have felt like a physical blow. It should have sent me collapsing against the wainscoting, clutching my chest and gasping for air like the fragile grandmothers on television. Instead, a glacial calm settled over my ribs. I felt my pulse slow down, steady and rhythmic, like a metronome counting down to an execution. I had not stumbled upon this scene by accident. Accidents are for amateurs, and I had ceased being an amateur decades ago. I had been waiting for this exact moment, standing like a statue in the shadows, listening to the confirmation of my darkest theories. I reached out, my fingers, steady and free of tremors, gripped the small privacy key resting on the doorframe where Louise always kept it. I inserted the pin into the hole on the handle with the precision of a surgeon. Click. The sound was barely louder than a heartbeat, but to me, it sounded like the slamming of a prison gate. They were too busy drowning in their own lust to hear it. They thought the locked door was protecting their privacy, keeping the world out. They did not realize I had just locked them in. I turned away from the door, the steam seeping from the crack beneath it, curling around my ankles like swamp mist. This house, with its perfectly manicured lawn and overpriced crown molding, was rotting from the inside out. I could smell the decay. It did not smell like mold or mildew. It smelled like expensive cologne and lies. The humidity in the hallway felt suffocating, sticking to my skin. A physical manifestation of the sickness that had infected my daughter's marriage. I walked softly down the stairs to the kitchen island, the plush carpet absorbing the weight of my steps. I had learned a long time ago, after the incident that took everything from me 30 years ago, that I would never again be the victim who didn't see the knife coming. I would never again allow someone I loved to be blindsided. That loss had calcified my heart, turning grief into a shield of hypervigilance. I retrieved my leather-bound notebook from my purse. It was worn at the edges, filled with dates, times, and observations collected over the last 6 months. They thought I was just a lonely widow, an old woman occupying space, fading into the beige wallpaper of their lives. They forgot what I used to be. You do not spend 30 years as an internal investigator for the Ridgefield Compliance Bureau without learning how to spot a lie. I knew how to follow the paper trail. I knew how to detect the slightest variance in a baseline. And most importantly, I knew how to wait. I opened the book to the page dated today. I uncapped my pen and wrote down the time, 2:14 in the afternoon. Enjoy the water. Damon, I whispered to the empty kitchen, my voice low and flat. It is going to get very cold. Very soon. Louise Barrett was the kind of woman who apologized to the table when she bumped into it. At 32 years old. My daughter was an art teacher at the local elementary school, a creature made of watercolors and soft edges. She was everything I was not. Where I saw risk and liability, Louise saw potential and hope. That was why she was so easy to break. She lived her life with an open heart in the quiet town of Ravenbrook, believing that the world was as kind as she was. When Damon Barrett first walked into our lives 3 years ago, I lowered my guard. He was 34. A sharp-dressed technology consultant with a firm handshake and a smile that seemed to promise stability. He fixed my leaking faucet without being asked. He brought Louise tulips on Tuesdays. He looked me in the eye and promised to take care of her. I believed him. That was the mistake that kept me awake at night. The change did not happen overnight. It was a slow erosion, like water wearing down a stone. First, the Sunday dinners stopped. Then, Louise stopped answering her phone, texting back hours later with short, robotic replies. I noticed that she no longer carried a debit card. When we went out for coffee, she had to ask him for cash, her cheeks flushing pink with embarrassment. I realized with a start that he had taken over her social media accounts too, posting happy photos of them that I knew Louise had not taken. It's just easier this way. Mom, she had said, looking down at her shoes when I confronted her. Damon is so good with numbers, and I'm so messy with them. He's just helping us save for the future. You know I'm not good with technical things. I tried to push back, but Damon was always there, hovering like a dark cloud. He had a way of dismissing me that was both polite and infuriating. He would place a hand on my shoulder, his grip just a fraction too tight, and smile that condescending smile. Marjorie, you have worked hard all your life, he would say, his voice smooth as oil. At your age, you should be resting, not worrying your head about our finances or how we run our household. Let me handle the heavy lifting. You're getting too old to stress about young people's problems. It was a warning wrapped in concern. He was telling me to back off. But the investigator in me, the part of my brain that had spent decades hunting down fraud at the Bureau, woke up. I started watching. I started listening. I became a shadow in their lives. The turning point came 2 months ago. I was in their kitchen, supposedly making tea, when I heard Damon on the back porch. He was speaking in a low, urgent tone. No, not yet. He hissed into the phone. We have to wait for the right time to transfer the assets. If we do it now, it looks suspicious. Just give me another month to prep the groundwork. My blood ran cold. He was not talking about stocks or savings. He was talking about liquidation. A week later, Louise fell down a flight of stairs at school. She told me she had tripped, but when I asked for details, her eyes glazed over. I don't really remember. Mum? She stammered, rubbing a bruise on her arm that looked angry and purple. 1 minute I was walking, and then I was just falling. I've been so clumsy lately. Damon says I'm just tired, clumsy, or drugged or pushed. That was the night I bought the leather notebook. I sat at my kitchen table and wrote down the first entry. I logged the bruises. I logged the missing money. I logged the strange gaps in her memory. I was no longer a mother-in-law visiting for tea. I was an operative building a case file. As I stood in that hallway today, listening to the water splash behind the locked door, the pieces finally clicked together. The affair was painful. Yes, it was a knife in the back of my daughter's heart. But as I touched the cover of my notebook, a terrifying thought took root in my mind. The cheating was not the main event. It was a distraction. I had to ask myself the question that terrified me the most. Was Damon just breaking her heart, or was he planning to erase her completely? The adhesive on the back of the digital voice recorder tasted like chemicals as I peeled the strip off with my teeth. My hands were steady, but my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. The streetlights cast long, skeletal shadows across Louise's driveway, and I was lying on the floor mat of her Volvo, taping the device under the driver's seat. Damon checked her phone logs. He checked her credit card statements. But he was too arrogant to check under the seat of a car he considered beneath his status. "You're safe now," I whispered to the empty car. Though I knew it was a lie. I had been watching the house for weeks. I had noticed the strange cars parked down the block, nondescript sedans with tinted windows that lingered for an hour and then vanished. Damon was not protecting my daughter. He was coordinating with wolves. I needed to know where he went when he told Louise he was working late at the office. The answer came from Louise herself, though she did not know it. Years ago, when she first bought the car, she had shared her GPS location with me for safety during long road trips. She had forgotten to turn it off. And Damon, in his infinite narcissism, had never bothered to check her location sharing settings. On Tuesday, the dot on my phone screen did not go to his office building downtown. It moved east, toward the jagged skyline of the industrial district, and stopped at a dilapidated apartment complex called The Summit. I followed him the next Thursday. I parked my beige sedan 2 blocks away, blending into the grey scenery of the neighborhood. I watched him exit his luxury car, looking out of place in his Italian suit, and walk briskly into Building C. I gave him 5 minutes. Then I followed. Standing outside door 3B, I pressed my ear to the wood. I expected the hush of a romantic tryst. Instead, I heard the raucous laughter of several people. Glasses clinked. Smoke filtered through the crack in the door, smelling of expensive cigars. 70,000 is the limit for this month, a man's voice said. It was Damon. If we pull more, the bank flags it. Don't be a coward. Damon? A woman's voice replied. It was sharp, commanding, and unfamiliar. We need the capital by the 1st of November if we want to seal the deal. I risked a glance through the gap in the blinds of the window next to the door. Damon was standing by the kitchen island, handing a thick manila envelope to a woman with hair the color of dried blood. She was not looking at him with lust. She was looking at the envelope with greed. This was not an affair of the heart. This was a business transaction. I retreated to my car, my mind racing. I needed names. I needed a paper trail. I drove straight to my own home and unlocked the fireproof safe in my study. Inside was a legacy hard drive from my time at the Ridgefield Compliance Bureau. Accessing the old database was a felony. I could lose my pension. I could go to prison. I did not care. I plugged the drive into my laptop, the screen illuminating my face in a ghostly blue light. I ran a search for the address of the apartment complex. It was owned by a shell company called Vantage River Holdings. I cross-referenced the name with the woman's description and hit a match. Her name was Evelyn Cross, a former broker who had lost her license for wire fraud 10 years ago Then I saw the transfers. Damon had been moving money not from his accounts, but from joint holdings that Louise had access to but never checked. $10,000 here. $15,000 there. It was all funneling into Vantage River Holdings. He was not just stealing from her. He was methodically stripping her of every asset she owned. He was creating a narrative where Louise was financially incompetent, draining her worth to fund a new life with Evelyn Cross. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the screen burning my tired eyes. I picked up the phone to dial the local precinct, my finger hovering over the number 9. Then I stopped. No, I said aloud to the empty room. If I called the police now, Damon would claim it was investment mismanagement. He would claim Louise signed off on it, and knowing his manipulative skills, he probably had her signature on documents she had never read. He would walk away with a slap on the wrist, and my daughter would still be broke and broken. I needed more than suspicion. I needed to catch him in the act of destroying her. I needed to let him think he was winning until the exact moment I closed the trap. I closed the laptop. My decision made. The law could wait. Justice, however, was already in motion. The distance between my daughter and me was no longer measured in miles, but in the thick, suffocating layers of manipulation Damon had wrapped around her. I tried to visit on a Tuesday morning, bringing her favourite blueberry scones, hoping to break through the fog that had settled over her eyes. But the woman sitting across from me at the kitchen table was not the vibrant artist I raised. She was a ghost, pale and trembling, her hands clutching a mug of tea as if it were the only anchor in a spinning world. "Mom, please. You have to stop," Louise said, her voice thin and reedy. "Damon says he says you're projecting your own loneliness onto us. He thinks you might be confused." It felt like a physical slap. He had not just pushed me away. He had rewritten my character in her mind. To her, I was no longer the protector. I was the senile old woman who needed to be managed. "I am not confused, Louise," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rage boiling in my gut. "I am worried. You look exhausted. You have lost weight. I'm just overwhelmed," she whispered, looking toward the door as if afraid he would materialize. "Damon says I'm too sensitive to handle the finances right now. He says I forget things. Yesterday, I couldn't remember signing a check for $5,000, but he showed me my signature. It was right there. My blood ran cold. I glanced at the pile of mail on the counter. Peeking out from under a magazine was a document on heavy bond paper. I recognized the letterhead. It was a request to transfer joint ownership of their primary savings account solely to Damon Barrett. Louise had already signed it. She had signed away her security because he had convinced her she was too broken to hold on to it. Just then, the back door opened. Damon walked in, bringing a gust of cold air and the scent of expensive musk with him. He did not look surprised to see me. He looked bored. "Marjorie," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I thought we agreed that Louise needs rest. You coming over here and filling her head with wild theories isn't helping her anxiety. She isn't anxious." "Damon," I shot back, standing up. "She is fading away, and you are the one holding the eraser." He laughed, a dry, dismissive sound. He walked over to Louise and placed a hand on the back of her neck. I watched her flinch, then lean into his touch like a trained animal seeking approval. "See, she's shaking," Damon said, his voice dropping to a faux sympathetic register. I've been talking to a specialist. I think it's time for a professional assessment. Dr. Eris has an opening next week. If she's declared unstable, then I can take the burden of legal decisions off her shoulders completely. It's for her own good. I saw the trap snap shut. A psychological evaluation. If he could get a doctor to certify that Louise was mentally incompetent, he would have legal guardianship over her and her entire inheritance. He wouldn't need to forge signatures anymore. The law would hand him the keys. I left the house before I did something that would get me arrested. I needed an expert opinion, not an emotional outburst. I drove straight to the small bungalow on the edge of town where Sarah lived. Sarah had been a head nurse in the emergency room for 40 years before retiring. She had seen everything from drug overdoses to domestic poisonings. We sat on her porch, and I described the symptoms in clinical detail, the memory gaps, the lethargy, the slight slur in Louise's speech that happened only in the evenings, the sudden clumsiness. Sarah listened, her face grim. She took a long sip of her iced tea and looked me in the eye. "Marjorie, that doesn't sound like anxiety," Sarah said, her voice low. "That sounds like sedation, long-term, low-dose exposure to benzodiazepines or maybe something older, like phenobarbital. It makes you pliable. It messes with your short-term memory. It makes you doubt your own mind." "He's drugging her," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "He is making her sick so he can sell the cure. If she goes into that evaluation with those drugs in her system, she will fail." Sarah warned. "They will look at her dilated pupils and her confusion, and they will sign whatever paper he puts in front of them. You don't have much time." I gripped the armrest of the wicker chair. I had thought this was a battle over money. I was wrong. It was a battle for my daughter's mind. Damon was not just a thief. He was a predator dissecting his prey while she was still alive. And he had no idea that he had just given me the one thing I needed to destroy him, a timeline. Helen Stroud was a shark in a silk blouse. She operated out of a corner office in downtown Denver that smelled of mahogany and aggressive litigation. I had chosen her for a specific reason. Helen did not just handle divorces. She specialized in financial abuse and coercive control cases. She was the kind of lawyer who looked at a crying woman and handed her a tissue with one hand and a subpoena with the other. "You have excellent instincts, Marjorie," Helen said, tapping a manicured fingernail on the timeline we had constructed across her desk. "This isn't just a bad marriage. This is a systematic dismantling of a person's legal identity." We had spent the last 4 hours mapping Damon's movements against Louise's declining health. The correlation was terrifyingly perfect. Every time Louise had a bad episode or a memory lapse, a significant sum of money moved from their joint account to the shell company I had uncovered. "He is building a case for incapacitation," Helen explained, her voice devoid of emotion. "If he can prove Louise is mentally unfit, he gets power of attorney. He won't need to forge signatures anymore. He will legally own her voice." "So we stop him," I said, my hands clenching into fists on my lap. "We go to the police now." "Not yet," Helen countered sharply. "We have suspicion. We have a few unauthorized transfers. But he will claim she authorized them verbally. We need proof of intent. We need to provoke a reaction that shows his true priority." That was how we concocted the lie. Helen drafted a formal letter on thick, creamy stationery from a fictional law firm in Connecticut. It stated that Louise's great-aunt, a woman who had actually passed away 10 years ago, had left a secondary trust fund that was finally maturing. The amount was significant, $500,000. The catch was that the funds could only be released directly to Louise Barrett upon her signature, provided she was of sound mind. We mailed it to their house on a Tuesday. I was sitting in my car 3 blocks away when Damon's call came through to Louise's phone, which I was monitoring through the shared cloud account he thought he had locked me out of. "Babe, listen to me." His voice crackled through the speaker, tight with excitement. "A letter came today. It's complicated. But we need to get you to sign this release form immediately. Tonight. I don't feel well. Damon?" Louise's voice sounded groggy, barely a whisper. "Can't it wait until tomorrow? My head is spinning." "No," he snapped, then quickly softened his tone. No. Honey? The deadline is strict. If we don't sign by midnight, the taxes will eat up 40% of it. Do you want to lose $200,000 because you have a headache? I'll guide your hand. You just need to hold the pen." He did not ask how she was feeling. He did not ask about her headache. He did calculations. He saw $500,000, and he was ready to drag his sick wife out of bed to secure it. I played the recording for Helen the next morning. She listened, her eyes narrowing. "He is desperate," she noted, "and desperation makes people sloppy. But I found something else." I ran a background check on his time in Chicago, before he met Louise. He was never charged, but there was an inquiry. She slid a file across the desk. His ex-fiancée filed a restraining order 7 years ago. Helen continued. She claimed he coerced her into signing over her stock portfolio while she was recovering from surgery. She dropped the charges after a settlement, but the pattern is identical. He targets vulnerable women, isolates them, and bleeds them dry. "I want him in jail," I said, the cold fury rising in my throat. "I want him to rot." "He will," Helen promised. "But to make it stick, we need him to confess, not to the police, but to you. He thinks you are a harmless, interfering old woman. He thinks he has won. We are going to let him believe that." Helen leaned forward. "Let him continue his plan with the evaluation. But this time, we control the playground. I want you to install high-definition audio and video surveillance in your own home, the living room, the kitchen, the hallway, everywhere." "My home?" I asked, confused. "Why my home?" He avoids it, because when the pressure gets too high at his house, or when he thinks he has finally broken Louise, he will come for you, Helen said, her eyes gleaming with a predatory light. He will come to gloat, or to threaten, or to look for her. And when he steps into your house, Marjorie, he won't be walking into a grandmother's cottage. He will be walking into a recording studio. I nodded slowly. It was a dangerous game. We were using my daughter as bait and my home as a trap. But as I looked at the file of his past victim, I knew there was no other way. "Do it," I said. "Wire the place. I want to see the color of his eyes when he realizes he is lost." The brochure Damon left on the kitchen counter looked like an invitation to paradise. It featured glossy photos of sun-drenched gardens, smiling staff in crisp white uniforms, and a promise of total holistic restoration. But the name, Oakbridge Wellness Center, sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was located 2 hours away, deep in the mountains, isolated and secure. Damon called it a necessary break for Louise's mental health. I called it what it was, a storage unit for a wife he had finished using. I spent the morning digging into Oakbridge's history, It did not take long for the veneer to crack. Behind the 5-star reviews, which were suspiciously generic, I found 3 settled lawsuits in the last 4 years. The charges ranged from medical negligence to false imprisonment. It was a place where wealthy families parked their inconvenient relatives until the checks stopped clearing or the wills were read. If Louise went in there, I might not get her out until Damon had stripped her of every cent she owned. I could not let that happen. The night before the scheduled transfer, I watched Damon's car pull out of the driveway at 7 o'clock sharp. He was heading to his gym session, which I knew was actually a rendezvous with Evelyn Cross to celebrate their impending victory. As soon as his taillights vanished around the corner, I let myself in with the spare key he thought Louise had lost months ago. The house was dark, smelling faintly of lavender and stale air. I found Louise curled up on the living room sofa, staring blankly at the television. Though the screen was black, she looked small, fragile, like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and glued back together wrong. "Mom," she croaked, her voice thick and slurred. "Is that you? I feel so heavy today." I sat beside her, brushing a strand of limp hair from her forehead. Her skin was clammy. "I'm here." "Honey?" I whispered. "Did you eat dinner?" "Damon made me a smoothie," she mumbled, her eyes drifting shut and then snapping open with effort. "He makes them every night. Says it's full of vitamins, but I can't remember if I drank it all. My head feels like it's full of cotton." On the coffee table sat a half-empty glass. The green liquid inside separated into murky layers. I felt a surge of cold rage. He was not just gaslighting her, he was chemically restraining her. "Rest now, Louise," I said softly. "I'll just clean up a bit." I took the glass into the kitchen. I did not wash it. Instead, I poured the remaining liquid into a sterile sample jar I had brought from my kit. I capped it tight, wrapped it in a plastic bag, and shoved it deep into my purse. Then I washed the glass, dried it, and placed it in the cabinet. I drove straight to a 24-hour urgent care clinic where a favor was owed to me. The lab technician, a man named Gary, who I had helped out of a legal bind 10 years ago, ran the panel while I paced the waiting room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a sound that grated against my nerves. 40 minutes later, Gary came out. He did not look happy. "Marjorie, this isn't just vitamins," he said, handing me the printout. "We found high concentrations of diazepam and a muscle relaxant. It's a cocktail, enough to cause confusion, memory loss, and extreme fatigue. If she takes this every night, she's walking around in a permanent fog. It's not lethal yet, but it's dangerous." I stared at the paper. The numbers danced before my eyes. This was battery. This was poisoning. My hand shook, not from fear, but from the effort it took not to drive back to that house and tear Damon apart with my bare hands. But I couldn't. If I confronted him now, he would claim Louise took the pills herself. He would claim she was an addict. He would spin the story, and without video proof of him spiking the drink, it would be his word against a confused woman and her meddling mother. I needed him to be the one to say it. I needed him to hang himself with his own arrogance. I drove home in silence, the road blurring ahead of me. I sat at my desk and opened my journal. The ink flowed dark and heavy onto the page. October 23rd. He thinks he is putting her away to silence her. He does not realize he has just given me the weapon I need. I will not save her by shouting. I will save her by letting him think he has already won. I closed the book. The day he incriminates himself is not far. Paranoia is a contagious disease. and my son-in-law had finally caught it. For weeks, I had been the one looking over my shoulder. But now the dynamic had shifted. Damon started checking the blinds in the front window 3 times an evening. He stopped parking his car in the driveway and began pulling it into the garage, closing the door before he even turned off the engine. He felt eyes on him, though he could not say whose. I knew I had to move quickly. Louise was no longer safe in that house, not even for one more night. Under the cover of a moonless Tuesday, while Damon was ostensibly working late but actually drinking with his business partners, I drove to the house and packed a single suitcase for my daughter. I woke her gently. She was groggy, her eyes unfocused from the cocktail of sedatives he had fed her at dinner. "We are going on a little trip." "Honey?" I whispered, guiding her down the stairs. "Just you and me." I told Damon the next morning, via text message, that Louise had been called away to an emergency wellness retreat for educators in Santa Fe. It was a lie so thin you could read a newspaper through it. But Damon accepted it because it suited him. He wanted the house empty. He wanted clear air to finish whatever dirty business he was conducting, but he did not know about the eyes I left behind. 2 nights later, I sat in my darkened study, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating my coffee cup. The hidden cameras I had installed, authorized by a court order Helen had quietly secured, broadcast a live feed of my daughter's living room. At 11 o'clock at night, Damon did not come home to sleep. He came home to hunt. On the screen, I watched him pace the hallway. He was not the smooth, confident executive anymore. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled. He walked to the locked filing cabinet in the home office and, without hesitating, kicked the wood next to the lock until it splintered. He wasn't looking for sentimental keepsakes. He was tearing through folders, throwing papers onto the floor in a frantic search for the deed to the lake house and Louise's birth certificate. His phone rang. The high-definition audio picked up his voice clearly. "I can't find the damn trust documents. Evelyn?" He snarled into the receiver, pacing in tight circles. "She must have moved them. No, I don't think she suspects anything. She's too medicated to know what day of the week it is." He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. "We don't have time to wait," he hissed. "The plan must be completed within this month. If I don't liquidate the assets by the 30th, the investors walk, and I am left holding the debt. I need you to wash the first transfer through the shell company by Friday." I froze the frame and zoomed in on his face. I had the name Evelyn Cross, and now I had the confirmation. She was not just a lover, she was a professional money launderer. I had spent 20 years chasing people like her at the bureau. They were ghosts who turned illegal cash into clean assets. And she was the architect of my daughter's financial ruin. The next day, the atmosphere shifted from tense to dangerous. Damon called me at 2 in the afternoon. He did not bother with pleasantries. I called the school district. "Marjorie," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "There is no retreat in Santa Fe." My hand tightened around the phone. Louise was mistaken about the location. I lied, keeping my voice level. "She is safe." "Damon?" "She just needed rest." "I think you are confused," he replied, the menace dripping from every syllable. "I think you are hiding my wife from me. And you know, it is very dangerous for an elderly woman to live alone in that big house of yours. Accidents happen all the time. Stairs are slippery. Gas lines leak. You really should be careful." He hung up before I could answer. It was not a warning. It was a promise. I called Helen immediately. He knows, I told her. He knows I have her. Get a security detail. Marjorie, Helen urged, her professional demeanour cracking with genuine fear. I can have a private guard at your door in 1 hour. Do not stay there alone tonight. No, I said, staring at the blank screen of my phone. If I get a guard, he will spook, he will run, and he will take the money he has already stolen with him. I need him to come here. I need him to feel arrogant enough to walk through my front door and confess everything to my face. You are playing with fire, Helen warned. I am not playing. Helen, I replied, looking at the sleeping form of my daughter on the monitor in the guest room. I am finishing this. I checked the new camera I had installed in my own kitchen that morning. The angle was perfect. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for the wolf to blow the house down. The doorbell rang at exactly 11:45 at night. It was not a polite request for entry. It was a demand, a long, continuous depress of the button that echoed through the silent house like a siren. I was not asleep. I was sitting in the dark living room, fully dressed, my hands folded in my lap. I had been expecting this. I walked to the door, my heart beating with a slow, heavy rhythm. When I opened it, Damon was standing on the porch. The porch light cast deep shadows over his face, making his eyes look like hollow sockets. He did not look like the polished corporate executive anymore. He looked like a man whose carefully constructed reality was beginning to fracture. Where is she? Marjorie Damon asked, his voice low and dangerous. I know she isn't in Santa Fe. I called every retreat center in the state. Stop playing games. I am not in the mood. I don't know what you mean. Damon, I stammered, stepping back to let him in. I made my shoulders slump, shrinking my posture to look smaller, older, more confused. She called me, said she needed space. I thought you knew. He pushed past me into the foyer, bringing the smell of cold night air and aggression with him. He scanned the room, his eyes darting from the coat rack to the stairs. She's my wife. He spat. She is sick. She needs her medication. If she misses a dose, God knows what she will do. She isn't stable. Marjorie, you of all people should know that. I know. I know she has been struggling, I said, wringing my hands. Come into the kitchen. I'll make tea. You look exhausted. I led him down the hallway. I needed him in the kitchen. Directly above the island, concealed within the casing of the smoke detector, was the high-definition camera and microphone Helen and I had installed 2 days ago. It was the kill box. Damon leaned against the granite counter, loosening his tie. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and contempt. He thought I was a foolish old woman who bought his narrative. It's not just struggling. Marjorie, Damon said, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. Louise is gone. Her mind is gone. I have been trying to protect her, but she is becoming a danger to herself. She can't manage the assets anymore. I'm trying to save our future, and she is fighting me like a child. I poured water into the kettle, my back to him so he couldn't see the sharpness in my eyes. It must be so hard for you, I murmured. I've seen her forget things. It's terrifying. Do you think it's permanent? He let out a short, arrogant laugh. Let's just say, I've had to make sure she doesn't hurt herself, he said. I've had to prepare her psychologically, sometimes. You have to break a bone to reset it properly. I made sure she wouldn't have the will to resist the transfer of power. It's for her own good. Once I have the guardianship, she can rest. She won't have to worry about money ever again. I turned around, handing him a mug. My hand trembled, but not from age. But the paperwork? I said, feigning ignorance. It seems so complicated. Is it safe I worry about the banks making mistakes? He took a sip, his guard completely down. He was basking in his own brilliance. The banks are idiots, he scoffed. I have everything under control. The real ledgers. The ones that matter. They aren't even in the house. I keep them at my place at the summit. Apartment 3B. Nobody looks there. It's a fortress. In 3 days, just 3 days, the consolidation will be complete, and I'll be the one signing the checks. I felt a jolt of electricity run through me. He had just confessed to coercion. He had admitted to manipulating her mental state. And most damning of all, he had given up the location of the fraudulent financial records. The camera above us had caught every syllable, every arrogant smirk. You are a good husband. Damon? I lied, the words tasting like bile, taking all that burden on yourself. Someone has to be the adult, he said, setting the mug down hard. Now, I'm going to search the guest rooms, if she is here. Marjorie, don't lie to me. Look all you want, I said softly. He stomped upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen, listening to doors opening and slamming shut. I had moved Louise to a motel on the other side of town an hour before he arrived. He would find nothing. 10 minutes later, he came back down, looking frustrated but slightly relieved. Fine, he said, buttoning his coat. But tell her to call me. She needs her pills. He walked to the back door, which led to the garage, rather than the front door. I'll let myself out this way, he muttered. Shortcut to the car. I watched him leave. As the door clicked shut, I let out a breath I had been holding for 20 minutes. I had him. I had everything. But then, I saw it. I walked over to the back door he had just exited. The deadbolt, which I always kept locked, was disengaged. He hadn't just unlocked it to leave. He had flipped the small latch on the handle that kept it from locking automatically from the outside. He had not left to go home. He had left the door open for himself. He knew I was lying. He knew I was hiding something. And he intended to come back tonight when he thought I was asleep to tear this house apart until he found what he was looking for. I stared at the unlocked handle, and for the first time that night, true fear gripped my throat. He wasn't done. He was just regrouping. The raid on apartment 3B at the Summit complex took exactly 12 minutes to yield the smoking gun we had been hunting for. While Detective Miller and his team breached the door, Helen and I stood in the corridor, the fluorescent lights humming above us like a hive of angry wasps. Inside the apartment, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the pantry, they found the ledger. It was not digital, it was physical. A black binder filled with transfer slips and pre-signed power of attorney documents. Look at this. Marjorie, Helen said, her voice trembling with professional vindication as she held up a sheet of paper. He had a liquidation schedule. He planned to drain the last $200,000 from Louise's trust fund by Friday at noon. We had the evidence. Now we needed the man. I drove back to my house with a police escort trailing 2 blocks behind in an unmarked van. Louise was sitting in the passenger seat of my car. She was terrified, her hands gripping her knees, but her eyes were clear for the first time in months. We had flushed the sedatives from her system, and the anger was finally starting to burn through the fog. I have to face him. Mom. She had told me earlier, if I don't stand up to him now, I never will. We did not have to wait long. Damon arrived 20 minutes after we entered the house. He did not knock this time. The back door, the one he had rigged earlier, swung open with a violent crash. He stormed into the kitchen, his face flushed, his tie hanging loose around his neck like a noose. He had clearly tried to access the offshore accounts and found them frozen by the court order Helen had filed an hour ago. "What did you do?" he roared, slamming his fist onto the granite island. "Marjorie, who the hell do you think you are? My accounts are locked, you senile old witch." He stopped dead when Louise stepped out from the shadows of the pantry. She stood tall, wearing jeans and a sweater, not the pajamas he preferred to keep her in. "She didn't do it, Damon," Louise said, her voice shaking but growing louder with every word. "I did. I signed the affidavit this morning." Damon stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a hook. Then, the mask slipped completely. His face twisted into a snarl of pure malice. "You stupid girl," he hissed, stepping toward her with a menacing lunge. "You have no idea what you've done. You think you can survive without me. You are weak. You are nothing but a broken doll that I glued together. I managed your life because you were too pathetic to do it yourself. Step back." "Damon," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a whip. "Shut up!" he screamed, spinning toward me, his eyes wild. "This is your fault. You poisoned her against me. I had a plan. I was going to secure our future. And now I'm going to have to fix this mess the hard way." He reached into his jacket pocket. I did not know if he was reaching for a weapon or a phone, and I never found out. Blue and red lights exploded through the kitchen windows, painting the walls in a chaotic strobe of color. The front door burst open. "Police, get on the ground, now." Detective Miller and 2 uniformed officers flooded the room, their weapons drawn. Helen Stroud walked in behind them, holding a black leather folder. She looked at Damon with the cold satisfaction of an executioner. "Damon Barrett," Helen announced, her voice ringing with authority. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and the attempted poisoning of a spouse. We have the ledger from the apartment. We have the video of you spiking her drink. It is over." Damon froze. He looked at the police, then at Louise, and finally at me. 2 officers grabbed his arms, forcing him against the refrigerator to cuff him. The metal clicked shut, a sound even sweeter than the lock I had turned on the bathroom door days ago. As they dragged him toward the door, he thrashed, his shoes scuffing the floor. He twisted his neck to look at me, his eyes wide with disbelief and narcissism. "You did this," he screamed, spit flying from his lips. "You ruined everything. You ruined my life. You destroyed me." "Marjorie." I stood next to my daughter, wrapping my arm around her shoulders. I looked him dead in the eye, my expression as flat and hard as a tombstone. "No, Damon," I said softly. "You did that yourself." The courtroom was cold, air-conditioned to a temperature that felt designed to strip away emotion. But my hands were warm as I held Louise's trembling fingers. The arraignment had been swift, but the trial had dragged on for 3 excruciating weeks. Today, however, the air felt different. It was heavy with the promise of an ending. Damon sat at the defense table, his expensive suit looking a size too big for him now. He had lost weight. The arrogance that had defined him was gone, replaced by a twitchy, nervous energy. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Mrs. Gable, read the list of charges. It was a long list. It included wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and, most damning of all, domestic abuse and coercive control. When Louise took the stand, the entire room went silent. She looked small in the witness chair, but when she spoke, her voice did not waver. "He told me I was crazy," Louise said, gripping the wooden railing until her knuckles turned white. "He told me that if I didn't listen to him, I would end up in a home. I was afraid to sleep because I didn't know what I would wake up to. I didn't know who I was anymore." The defense attorney tried to paint Damon as a caring husband, overwhelmed by a sick wife. But the evidence was a fortress they could not breach. The video from my kitchen played on the large screens. The audio of him admitting to the psychological preparation echoed off the mahogany walls. The ledger from apartment 3B lay on the judge's bench like a brick. The forensic toxicologist explained, in simple terms, exactly how the sedatives had suppressed Louise's cognitive functions. There was no room for doubt. When the judge asked Damon to stand for the verdict, the silence in the room was deafening. On the count of grand larceny, guilty. On the count of coercive control, guilty. The gavel came down with a sound that vibrated in my chest. The sentence was 15 years in a federal penitentiary, with no possibility of parole for the first 10. Louise let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. It was the sound of a heavy weight being cut from her shoulders. She slumped against me, burying her face in my shoulder, shaking uncontrollably. Damon did not scream this time. He did not look at us. He simply stared at the table, his face grey and empty, as the bailiffs cuffed his hands behind his back. He was no longer a monster. He was just a prisoner. We walked out of the courthouse into the blinding afternoon sun. Reporters swarmed the steps, thrusting microphones in our faces, asking for a comment on the scandal of the year. I did not stop. I put my arm around my daughter, shielding her from the flashing cameras, and we walked straight to my car without saying a single word. I had no desire to be famous. I just wanted to go home. For the next 2 months, Louise lived with me. It was a quiet time. We spent our mornings drinking coffee on the porch and our evenings painting in the studio she had abandoned years ago. Slowly, the colour returned to her cheeks. The spark came back into her eyes. She was healing, not just from the drugs, but from the lies. One crisp Tuesday afternoon, I walked into the backyard with my old leather notebook. The edges were frayed, and the pages were filled with the dark history of the last year. I had a metal bucket and a box of matches. I tore the pages out one by one, the dates, the times, the observations of betrayal. I fed them all to the small fire I had built in the bucket. I watched the ink turn to ash. I watched Damon's name curl up and disappear into smoke. I did not need to remember anymore. The investigation was closed. I went back inside and stood by the large bay window looking out over the garden. The autumn leaves were turning gold and crimson, vibrant and alive. A younger version of me might have thought that at 58, my life was winding down. But as I watched the smoke drift up into the blue sky, I realized the truth. This was not the end. I had faced a wolf and won. I had saved my daughter. I had reclaimed my family. I'm just getting started. I whispered to the reflection in the glass. I turned away from the window, ready to make dinner for my daughter, ready to live the second act of my life on my own terms. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was quite a journey for Marjorie and Louise, and I'm so glad justice was finally served. Please comment below and let me know where you are tuning in from today. I'd love to chat and hear your thoughts on the ending. Don't forget to subscribe to the Grandma's Family Diary channel, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people.